that's something that's always fascinated me a lot about the influence that the environment has on life. The influence that the environment has on life. It's not just this mechanical nature of the universe that causes life to happen, but that it's this process, this interaction between environment and the organism. Interaction between environment and the organism. Yeah, before we dive too far into that though, I was wondering if you wanted to have a little meta discussion about like podcasting.
Sure.
Yeah, so here we are, 2022. The world of like ex-Mormon and Mormon podcasting has kind of changed quite a lot in some ways, and in some ways it's been the same since like I guess when you got started in like what 2010 or around that time.
About that time,
yeah. So back in the early 2000 teens, the Infants on Thrones, you used to say that it was this place where people would come to kind of the Mormon podcasting world, and they might come to it through like Mormon stories and have like this like learning phase or something, and then this angry phase where they would listen to like Mormon expression, and then this like phase where they're at peace with like Mormonism when they come land on like Infants on Thrones. Do you kind of see Infants on Thrones these days as that same like landing spot?
This is Infants on Thrones.
Baby steps.
You want someone to preach to you.
The philosophies of men.
I like magical toys.
You want religion, do you?
Mingled with humor.
I don't believe in them.
There will be many willing to preach to you the philosophies of men mingled with humor.
We are evolving.
Baby steps.
You can buy anything in this world of money.
Look for the good in everything. Look for the people who will set your soul free. It always seems impossible until it's done. Look for the good in everyone.
All right, welcome back to Infants on Thrones. I'm Glenn Ostland, and this is episode 811. Continued Search for Meaning. And I recorded this conversation back in March of 2022 with Wren, who I hope you're familiar with at this point as being a new panel member on Infants on Thrones. I did have a conversation with Wren. What did I call it? Transgender testimony time, something like that. Wren is fantastic. I learned so much from her, and we had this great conversation back in March that I just haven't published until now. So I'm publishing it now. And that's really all I need to say. Here we go.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
I'm excited for this.
I'm excited for this as well.
Because this is one where I'm like so unprepared for what you want to talk about. I did look up this woman, but I don't read books anymore. I only listen to them. And that book that you read wasn't on Audible, but there's another one of hers called Staying with the Trouble by Donna J. Haraway. Have you read that one?
I haven't gotten to that one yet. No.
Okay. Is it good? Because I haven't started listening to it yet.
I think so. I watched a lecture she did based on that, which was good.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, before we dive too far into that though, I was wondering if you wanted to have a little meta discussion about like podcasting.
Sure.
Yeah, so here we are, 2022. The world of like ex-Mormon and Mormon podcasting has kind of changed quite a lot in some ways, and in some ways it's been the same since like I guess when you got started in like what 2010 or around that time.
About that time. Yeah.
So back in the early 2000 teens, the Infants on Thrones, you used to say that it was this place where people would come to kind of the Mormon podcasting world, and they might come to it through like Mormon stories and have like this like learning phase or something, and then this angry phase where they would listen to like
Yeah.
Mormon expression, and then this like phase where they're at peace with like Mormonism when they come land on like Infants on Thrones. Do you kind of see Infants on Thrones these days as that same like landing spot?
No, and by the way, it wasn't me who said that. I think that was Matt or Scott. But and I even at the time when I think when I recently released the interview that we did on Mormon Stories back in 2014, I think it came up in there, and I remember hearing it and just kind of like laughing, oh, come on. I mean, it's so like that to me seems very self-serving and like, okay, maybe that's what we would like us to be, but who knows what the experience is of any listener or even the main listeners. And when we started Infants on Thrones, and it was a group of people instead of just like me, like it is now. I never wanted it to be me like it is now. I always wanted it to be a group of people that we're all like creating stuff. Like, what is it that we're passionate on about? And we record our own stuff. And sometimes we bring each other on for panels, and sometimes we bring on other people for panels. And we kind of did that for a while. But we compared ourselves against Mormon expression and Mormon stories, where there was the cult of personality, in John Larson and John DeLynn. And we did not want to be that. We didn't want anybody to become like anything like that. So a lot, I think, of we're the place that people go when they're done with those was kind of like an egoic, like we're better, we're above them kind of thing that was coming out that way. That's how I felt about it at the time, and it made me feel a little uncomfortable when I heard that at the time. But I'm like, whatever, that's fine.
Yeah. What do you think?
So you're asking me like now where do I see infants fitting into the world?
Because you've got like
idea, Wren.
Those, I don't know if you know or if you've surveyed the landscape recently or not, but like John DeLynn, John Larson, they've teamed up. They're a combined force now.
Nice.
And
cool.
So do you see Infants on Thrones as part of the like Mormon podcast conversation at all?
Not really. I don't know what Infants on Thrones is anymore, except that there's people that still like it. And I don't totally know why. And I, I don't have any kind of roadmap of like what I'm trying to do or where it's trying to go. So I've been going by the seat of my pants this whole time. Like
That's
whatever's interesting to me at the time I talk about.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've been doing a lot of like, throwbacks to kind of that time period. And I really liked that format of, a group of people kind of doing what they love and then just kind of like, asking other people. And I can't remember who it was. One of my favorite episodes actually was, I think it was Scott was his name, or somebody who did an interview with the Bigfoot guy from Idaho State.
Yeah, that was Scott. Yeah.
I love that one.
And it took him like a year to edit that thing. It was like Scott. Yeah, it's something Todd Meldrum, something Scott Meldrum. Was something Meldrum, I think was the guy's name. I'm like, Scott, have you edited that one yet? Are we ready to publish it? He's like, man. I'll do it. I'll get to it. Yeah, and he did 2 parts, right? Because there was one that was Bigfoot, and what was the other one?
Oh, I don't know. Like
Bigfoot was the second one.
A long time ago.
Yeah. Rodney, I don't remember what his name was. Rod Meldrum. I don't know.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I kind of go through these cycles in my life where I'm like, I'm done with Mormon podcasts. I don't need to think about this anymore. But then I'm bored, or I've got like, chores and stuff. And then I'm like, I'm going to listen to some podcasts. And then like, I'll survey the landscape again. And there's a lot these days, and it's a lot of different ones. And like, I don't know. I don't know if it's healthy or not for me to like stay like coming back to them and like kind of digging up the like old like Mormon feelings of stuff, and visiting like ex-Mormon Reddit or something. Like I'll dip in and dip out because it's just like, well, okay, well, this is the same conversation that we were having 10 years ago. It's the same, I don't know. But yeah. I don't know if you've seen, but there's this is kind of a preview of what I want to talk about tonight. If you'll go on this voyage with me, Glenn.
Wren, I will go on any voyage with you. And before you go any further, like you said that you liked the format where it was a group of people that were all like creating stuff.
Yeah.
You're welcome to be one of those people if you'd like, Wren.
Shoot. Wow.
I know what you can do. I know your talents.
All right.
You've got the invitation and the green light, and you're part of this coaching group now that, like I asked you last night, the question that I did, because but you're probably wondering, what did I get myself into with this thing? But like, I could see several of them in there as also like, I've have this little fantasy of like an Infants 2.0 where I'm just kind of more in the background and let the next generation come in and do all their stuff or whatever. Because there's some cool stuff there.
Yeah, there is. It's weird. Like, well, I don't want to get into too much about what we talked about last night, but I really enjoyed it, and I was grateful for your kind of follow-up thoughts and stuff. But so in the current Mormon podcast scene, there's actually a podcast for Deseret nationalists. I don't know. Have you heard this term? Desnats, what that is?
Oh, Desnats. I think I've heard. It's kind of like a preppers type thing. I don't know.
Glenn, they're Nazis.
I stopped paying attention to
Nazis. They're here. They're on the home front.
That's what it is? They're Nazis?
Fascists, for sure.
Fascists, yeah. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And
is it like skinhead white supremacists?
No,
stuff?
they're like interpreting traditional Mormonism as it is like spoken in the Book of Mormon, that like this land was made for the Mormons, and Deseret is their land, and they're gonna enforce it.
Rise up like a lion.
Yeah, or
whatever that, like bloom like a rose and rise up like a lion, lambs to the slaughter. I don't know all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the topic tonight, believe it or not, fascism, Glenn.
Okay.
We'll get there.
All right.
Have you seen this cartoon Attack on Titan?
No.
Are you into like anime at all?
Not anime. Not really. No. My daughter is.
Oh, really?
My 25-year-old daughter. Well, she started. She hasn't, but she recently started getting into it.
Yeah. Do you get that question a lot as like a Japanese missionary? Like, do people are like, oh, yeah.
Not really.
Nothing?
No, I don't. I don't much.
That's interesting. When I was in high school, all my friends, we were big nerds and big into anime and stuff. And so, secretly, no one would ever say this out loud, but if you pushed somebody to like ask, where they want to go on their mission amongst my group of friends, they would be like, oh yeah, it's Japan for sure, right? Like that's the one that everybody wanted to go to because we all love Japanese cartoons. But none of us got called there except this one kid. He did get called to Japan on his mission, but he was like the most annoying kid in high school. And I was so mad. I was like, oh my God.
That's where they send all the annoying ones.
No, I should, he's definitely when he got back, a very cool guy and definitely not annoying. And I wish I would have not thought of him as an annoying person in high school, but yeah.
I was disappointed when I got my mission call to Japan because
really?
I wanted to go to Russia because I thought for sure that's where the lost tribes of Israel were. And my patriarchal blessing told me that I would work with the lost tribes of Israel, that I would like get to know who they were and work with them. And then when I was in the MTC, I started hearing all these like rumors about the Japanese being the lost tribes of Israel. And then I got super excited about, and that's what I wrote my master's thesis on eventually. But I was disappointed when I found out that it was Japan, but I quickly repented of that and greatly enjoyed my experience, as you can see from all of the stuff behind me, like the little samurai helmets and stuff that I picked out.
Cool. Yeah. Did you ever take stock in the kind of like end of times prophecies about like
my
the
God,
Northern
yeah.
Army attacking Jerusalem and stuff? And did you think that was like Russia?
I that wasn't one of the signs of the times that I particularly latched on to. But there were lots that I did. One of the biggest ones for me was like, was it Talmage? Talmage was the one that wrote Jesus the Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And in 1912, so like I used to read Mormon Doctrine just for fun, like that Bruce R. McConkie book.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lost Tribes article in there talks about how Talmage predicted in 1912 that the Lost Tribes would come and that it would happen just like it says in the Doctrine and Covenants, and that there are people alive today, yea, verily, even here in this audience, who will live to see the return of the Lost Tribes. And so I started doing the math, and I'm like, my grandpa, who just died, was born in 1912. So we're getting to the end. So it's getting, and this was like in the early 90s, mid 90s.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, oh yeah, it's getting close. It's getting close. But I didn't think that the Northern Army was Russia or anything like that.
Yeah, wild times.
But I did think there was a time on my mission where I thought that there were golden plates that were hidden in a hillside somewhere that would be discovered. Yeah, that would be the Japanese record of Jesus visiting the Lost Tribes after he visited the Nephites.
Oh,
and
wow.
I wanted to be the Joseph Smith that would bring those records to light. So I looked for them. I didn't find them.
Oh, shoot.
I might not have had enough faith.
Yeah, they might have been on gold.
Yeah. Or maybe they just haven't been written yet, and I need to do that.
Oh,
if I'm going to be the Joseph Smith of them, I just need to write it, because I think that was his secret.
The things that are old shall be new again.
Yeah.
All right. So this Japanese cartoon, Attack on Titan, very popular cartoon these days if you're in the scene. It's quickly becoming like the number one like favorite anime of anime lovers worldwide, supplanting the beloved Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, right? Anyways, in Attack on Titan, it's a very grim and like shockingly violent show, and you think at the beginning of it that the whole point of this whole show is just the violence, just because of how crazy and insane it is. But an actual like story does develop, and the kind of first level story that you eventually arrive at is that there is this power called the coordinate that our lead protagonist has got to find, or at least all of the competing parties in the story are trying to find this thing called the coordinate. And what the coordinate is basically the power to control the fate of an entire race of people, right? And this is kind of the question that I want to focus on, is the power to control, and not just control people, but the power to control yourself. And getting to this book by Donna Haraway. So this book I emailed you about, I'm very excited about, because it's actually a very boring book. It's not exciting at all, but it's called Crystals, Fabrics, and Fields, Metaphors That Shape Embryos. And if you get into the science of embryology, developmental biology, talking about cells and how cells become an organism, you're faced with a very tricky question that people are still struggling with to this day. And that question is, how do the cells know how to become like a brain?
Yeah.
How do they know how to become an arm?
Hmm.
These kinds of questions.
Or like a bone cell or a
Or a
red
bone
blood
cell.
cell or
Yeah, like what?
how they diversify, what's directing them.
Yeah, what coordinates
Coordinates.
the
Yeah.
yeah, what is
What's the coordinate?
yeah, what's the coordinate that's
Yeah.
making these cells develop and progress and become us and all life on Earth, right? And in this book, Crystals, Fabrics, and Fields, Donna Haraway takes us all the way back to Rene Descartes, which I'm sure you've probably heard a lot about. And
I've heard about Descartes, therefore I am.
yeah. Descartes was a very famous philosopher and kind of scientist, responsible for basically the foundation of all modern scientific thought, because it was Descartes who first established three-dimensional coordinates, right? When you talk about the Cartesian coordinate system, we're talking about, an idea from Rene Descartes. Famously, he was trying to describe the movement of a bug in his room, and came up with this coordinate system. For the first time ever, probably not the first time ever, but he mapped out space, right? And a big part of Descartes' philosophy and the ideas that he put forward is this idea of a dualistic nature of reality, that there is mind and matter,
Right.
and that mind is incorporeal and has no coordinate, right? There is no spatial system for the mind, whereas for matter, everything exists in this space that is physical and material. And this division of mind and matter was super successful. It allowed science to be birthed, basically, or modern science, where you were able to then, with this spatial mapping of this material world, you're then able to come up with physics and come up with a mechanistic interpretation of how the world works, right? You can come up with all of these laws and mathematical models that describe the motion of corpuscular matter in this spatial space, right? And so people like Isaac Newton and Maxwell and the Lagrange, all these famous scientists during the scientific revolution, were very, very successful at describing our world, or at least describing this material world that exists in Cartesian space, right? And such to the point at the exclusion of just about everything else, right? A lot of people started believing that this mechanistic interpretation of reality was like the only reality, right? Because of how successful science was in predicting what our world is like.
As long as you focus on the material and you ignore whatever he said was the immaterial, is that right?
The mind, the immaterial,
mind,
as long as you can keep that separate,
Yeah.
and just then you're fine. But scientists eventually came back to these questions, in like life, like, because life does not follow these like physical laws as at all, basically, right? You cannot predict with any kind of like certainty like you can in physics or chemistry the behavior of human beings, or the behavior of animals, even the behavior of like plants to some extent, right? Life seems to have its own agenda independent of physical laws.
Can I pause and ask you a question? I don't want, if this is going to derail you from where you want to go, just tell
No,
me and keep going.
It's fine.
But you're saying life,
Yeah.
and under that Cartesian model, where does life, where would you categorize it? Would life be the material side, or would life be the mind side? Or
Yeah,
is it emerging from both?
Yeah, that's the crux of the question, right? Like
Okay.
that scientists are faced with is like, what about life? Like, is this, because it is apparent in like everything you look at, in your day-to-day experience, that that life, like I said, seems to have its own agenda, that it seems to have its own purposes. That you know a plant, you plant a corn seed and it becomes corn, kind of against the gradient of natural, like entropy laws, or thermodynamic laws, right? It uses the free energy to create its own thing, as opposed, and to organize itself, right, to coordinate its construction. And so people think the very same way you're thinking, Glenn. Like, well, is this then immaterial? Is it part of the physical world, or is there something more to life? And when you ask that question, is there something like more to life? That's when there's this current of thought called vitalism. This idea that life has an incorporeal nature to it that you can't describe using this Cartesian mapping or the physical laws that we have, that there's a vital essence, right? I'm sure you've heard before that all life has, that this vital essence is responsible for why life appears to defy these physical laws. And in fact, a lot of philosophers kind of put forward the idea that vitalism is the true like nature of reality, that everything that exists in this physical material world is really just an outward expression of like this internal mind, that's driven by vitalist forces, right, by the soul, if you want to say something like that, right? Some philosophers put forward. And so you end up with these two kind of opposing worldviews, that life is just a mechanical. There's just a mechanical nature to the universe, and everything in the universe is part of that machine, that follows very specific laws. Or no, there's this vital essence to the universe. There is a world where things like beauty and justice and love and choice exists, and that is the real, like, universe, of this universe of free agents. And these are the two, and in some ways today are still kind of the two basic opposing philosophies, right? And then you brought up this really important point, which kind of comes to this book that Donna Haraway wrote, which is that, well, maybe it's a function of both things, or maybe you can't, maybe it isn't just one or just the other, but both. And this is kind of the fundamental philosophy of organicism, or this kind of third way between these two opposing viewpoints. But basically, in this book, she outlines a lot of examples, or she highlights these three scientists, Joseph Needham, Paul Weiss, and Robert Harrison, I think, who were early 20th century embryologists, who studied developmental biology, and were wrestling with this very question about, specifically with regards to the nature of embryos and cell tissue, as to why why do they develop the way that they do? Is it a mechanical nature? Like if you have a seed cell and you put it in the right vat of chemicals, will it just generate into a human being or a newt, for example? Or is there something more to it than that? And in all of their cases, there is more to it than that. You can't just have an embryo grow in isolation. Kind of the key discovery from each of these scientists is that cell development depends on its environment and not just on its own internal code, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so let's pause right there and kind of let me ask you this question about like how universal do you think that might be? Do you, Glenn Oslin, where does your identity come from?
Where does my identity come from?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. So I think identity is the way that I see myself, right? Is that what you think? And so it comes from my mind. It comes from the experiences that I've had in life that are recorded somewhere up in here and exist somehow up in here in the form of like memory, both conscious and unconscious. That's like I think about Jake, brother Jake, having gone through what he went through with his cardiac arrest, and he was basically dead for a while and came back, and he's had an amazing recovery, but he's not back 100% like where he was before. His personality is pretty much the same that it was before, but you can still tell there's like, it's not quite the same. And it's not like it's worse or anything like that. It's just, there's a difference there as a result of what he went through with all of the brain. Like he had a lot of brain damage as a result of not getting oxygen for a while. So yeah, it makes me think that like his sense of identity, like there's things that he remembers and things that he doesn't. So just kind of like using him as an example, I think that identity exists within the mind, but in what form that takes, like, I have no idea.
Do you think that there is and then this is a little bit kind of like what we talked about last time, but like, do you think that there is an like a pure you inside of you that's like different from all of the material parts of your body?
That's a no, I don't. I mean, I don't really know how to answer that question because I think that identity starts with DNA. Like there's some like genetic ways that the body then forms as a result of what the blueprint is telling it to do. And I might have some genetic inclinations towards like depression or, like anything like that could impact my personality. And then that could influence the way that I interpret what's going on around me as I'm growing up. But as I'm growing up and I'm a kid, especially, I'm so impressionable that, like my mom might say, that's not you. You're not like that, or something. Yeah. And whether exactly. I believe it or not is another thing. But I have all of these influences, some coming from within me, within my own biology, and others coming from the environment around me, from other people. And all of those things form, I guess the way that I think of it is kind of like this database that's constantly being added to by every experience that we ever have. And that, like, my limited awareness of what that is, because I think that there's I've heard estimates from like 3% to 5% of our brain activity that we're actually aware of and conscious of, and the rest is just subconscious stuff that's running in the background, and it's definitely influencing the way that we are, and that includes the identity, how we see ourselves. But do I think that there is I think of all of those things kind of the way that you were describing the way that an embryo diversifies all of its cells. Like there are trillions of cells inside of my body that are all doing different things, and the result of what they're doing is the way that I'm consciously observing and thinking and feeling about myself. So I don't think that there's like a separate entity that's different from that, because I feel like it's all that. It's all of those things, but then I start, and I've listened to a lot of Alan Watts, so I start going into the interconnectedness of all things, and where would I draw the line on what's me and what's not me if I'm being influenced by things that are outside of me as well, and I consider that to be me. So I don't know if I'm taking the question where you wanted me to or not.
No, it's exactly, yeah. Yeah. So in this book I'm reading, right? So I started reading this like last fall, and when I first told you about it, and she keeps referencing this influence that's on all three of these scientists, and it's this guy by the name of Alfred Whitehead. Have you ever heard of this guy?
Was he into the occult?
No.
That's too bad. That'd be way more
that
fun.
would be cool. Yeah, that'd be a lot more fun.
Alfred Whitehead. No,
yeah.
I mean,
have you heard of a guy by the name of Bertrand Russell?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
he was a futurist, right? Bertrand Russell.
He was a really famous logician.
Okay.
So him and Alfred Whitehead, they wrote a book called Principia Mathematica, which is a completely insane name to give your mathematics book. You're basically, being Babe Ruth and pointing to the stands when you name your book that. But it's a really famous text that like basically laid out the foundational logic for like modern computers, right? But it's a mathematics book, and famously it takes like the first 70 pages to set up this proof that like 1 + 1 = 2. But they're quite ambitious. It's a 3-volume series that tried to like break mathematics down to its most like basic axioms, and then use those axioms to prove that mathematics was like a completely logically sound like system. Sounds weird, but that's what they wanted to do. And so that it's quite ambitious in that. But a guy by the name of Gödel, or what's his name? Not Gödel. But if you've heard like the incompleteness theorem, what's his? I think it. Let me check.
Oh, was that from Gödel?
Yeah. But basically, he proved them wrong, that you can't do what they were trying to do. Yeah, it is Gödel. Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Where he.
I knew it was Gödel.
I should have listened to you.
Yeah.
He set out a proof basically that says you cannot build any kind of mathematical logic that proves itself, right? There's always going to be, no matter what like axioms you start from, you're going to have to start at some assumption that is improvable. And so that while it stinks that their whole like project was kind of canceled, or not canceled, but disproven.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, like the work that they put into such an ambitious thing really did, like, pave modern mathematics. And people reference it a lot. Anyways, Alfred Whitehead, he he was kind of one of those out there mathematicians and physicists who kind of started dabbling in metaphysics and philosophy and tried to come up with their own.
So he was an occultist.
He was.
Yeah.
I read somewhere even that Alan Watts, speaking of, drew a lot of inspiration from him.
I think I definitely heard Alan Watts talk about Bertrand Russell. I may have heard him talk about Whitehead too. And
yeah,
like he probably just references Whitehead says this or this or that, and in like some of his lectures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he tried to come up with this philosophy called process philosophy, which is this kind of very idea that you were describing, that your identity or the reality even that we exist in isn't kind of this set thing. It's a process that's constantly being born and dying, based on the past and the future. And he came up with this idea called concrescence. Have you ever heard of this, concrescence? You'd love it, I think, if you looked into it. It's pretty cool. But he came up with this notion that to really like study it, you takes a while, because he basically invents his own like language for just talking about philosophy. And it's kind of hard because he's such a like logician, and he wants to get to like, okay, let's start here and define our terms in this very specific way, and then I'm going to make up this new term that I'm going to have my own definition for. But yeah, so he talks about concrescence, this thing called prehension, things called actual entities.
I think I've heard of prehension before.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah. So prehensions is kind of everything you were talking about previously that kind of make up you, that you don't, really have control over, right? Like your environment, your DNA, your past events, your past experiences. You've got
some control over your environment.
Yeah, you got some control over your environment, but there's a whole load of stuff that kind of is these prehensions to your conscious experience.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these prehensions get colored by your subjective biases.
Yeah. And which most of them are unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And concrescence is the act of taking all of those prehensions and becoming the person or the thing or the actual entity of that moment. So it's not that you pre-exist and kind of interpret all of these things that have happened. It's that all of these things influence this moment of creativity and this moment of creation that creates like the now moment, that immediately dies, right? And so I
like to think of it more as a continuously running now moment.
Yeah, but it's never the same as the previous now moment.
No.
Right. So this
and how do you even measure like when a moment starts and when a moment ends?
Right. Yeah.
You use Planck measurements of time, which are so minuscule and indistinguishable that like what is it even? How does it even know like a moment?
Right. Well, so that's this process philosophy that things, the universe itself is, and it's not just people, right? It's not just your conscious experience, but it's all actual entities. And Whitehead's definition of what an actual entity is everything, right? It is the universe, from the smallest puff of existence to God. Like there's this these are all actual entities, and they all intermingle and relate to each other like like electrons in a field, and
or like the microbiome in your gut
or like the
that
microbiome in your
regulate,
gut.
that has an influence on your immune system. And
Yeah. And so it's so that life is the process of all of these things coming together, and then concrescence is the many becoming one and then adding one, is what he says.
Many becoming one and then adding one.
Yeah.
Can you give me an example of that?
So the example a lot of people like to use is that of like a daffodil, where you have the roots and the in the ground of this plant, and all of these things are coming into the roots to grow this plant, and they all come together, right? Everything that existed before the plant, kind of came together in order to grow this tulip, and then out of everything, all of that coming together, they grow this thing that wasn't there before, which is this pretty flower.
Oh, so the
And
tulip is the and one.
yeah,
Okay.
which then goes on to influence the world around it, right? And
so that, but that process is constantly happening everywhere at every level.
Yes. Yeah.
So almost to the point, like when I think about it, it almost makes it irrelevant, because every single one of those things that is making the influence on the tulip was at one point the one that was being created by all of the other things that created it.
Yeah, it does at first blush kind of seem like, okay, well, this is kind of meaningless drivel, because you're just
Well, I don't think it's meaningless drivel.
Yeah. Well, sorry to put, yeah. But yeah, like it sounds cool, but maybe like finding the application is tough. But this,
if I understand it right, Wren, what I really like about it, it goes back to the interconnectedness of all things. Like we might think that like whoever my sense of identity is, I'm inside of this bag of skin and that's it. But what you're talking about is that this bag of skin, this body of mine, is the result of so many things that came before me, some on this planet, some outside, because the atoms that are inside were forged in the stars, and like all of these things coming together at this point in this time. Then my father's sperm, my mother's egg, boom, and all that stuff like that, everything that comes together, that I am actually all of that. I don't think of myself, like that question about identity, I don't think of myself as being those things, but why not? Like I might as well, because I rely on them, or have relied on them, just as much as I would rely on eating things that I would do to stay alive or whatever.
Yeah,
that's where I kind of go with it. So I don't think that it's meaningless drivel. I like the way that it kind of makes me feel connected to things that I normally wouldn't think about.
Yeah, and so in this book, the Crystals, Fabrics, Fields book, she makes the point that all of these guys were influenced by this idea, this process philosophy, and organicism that essentially means, right, that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, right? And so as these biologists were approaching this problem of embryos and embryology, she's claiming that they were inspired by this philosophy in order to reach this insight that embryos depend on their environment, and they're not just like coded to be a certain way. And she describes a whole bunch of experiments that they go over to kind of come to that conclusion. And so that's something that's always fascinated me a lot about stuff that I've studied, is the influence that the environment has on life,
Yeah.
and how, you know, it's not just this mechanical nature of the universe that causes life to happen, but that it's this process, this interaction between environment and the organism, and that you become what the environment, what you're able to become in that environment, right? And then it's like a feedback, right? Because then the environment becomes something else, right? In order to propagate this process and continue this dynamic play between actual entities in the environment. And so, you know, you can really ask the question, like, why is the sky blue? And there are a lot of correct answers to the question, why is the sky blue? One of the correct answers to why the sky is blue is because of the Rayleigh scattering of, you know, the light waves on the atmosphere, which is you know, that's a correct answer. Another correct answer, so like, why is the sky blue? The sky is blue so that you can contemplate why the sky is blue, right?
I don't like that answer as much.
Why not?
Because it suggests to me that there was an intent behind creating it that way so that humans could experience it in a certain way. That's kind of like an implication. What about the numbers of rods and cones that are in the human eye? That's
a correct answer as well, right? That, like,
is the sky blue for like butterflies or shrimp? They have different rods and cones. I listened to a Radio Lab episode many years ago that talked about like the rods and cones and eyes. That just blew my mind. Do you know?
Is the sky, well, I mean, of course it depends on what your definition of blue is.
Because then
right?
There's the question, like, why are we making the assumption that the sky is blue? Like, the sky being blue is conditional upon being looked at through a human eye.
Yeah.
So the sky's not really blue. It's only blue when a human is looking at it. In other cases, it will be something completely,
which is the answer to why
maybe.
it is blue, is because a human is looking at it, right?
Oh, okay. But not so that. The sky is blue so that a human can contemplate it. Or the sky is blue because it's being filtered through the human evolved nervous system.
Yeah.
That's what you meant by that second thing, so that people could
I'm saying that that's a correct answer.
Okay.
The sky is blue.
Yay. Do I get points?
So we've been talking a lot of stuff. Now let's pivot.
All right.
To some things.
I need to insert my friend's Ross. Pivot. Pivot.
So human identities, are you with me that they're not formed inertly, that they depend on their environment?
Absolutely. And I would say environment, I think when you say the word environment, people typically think outer environment, and ignore inner environment. And so I'd want to include the inner as well as the outer environment, because I think there's as much empty space inside of our bodies as there is outside of our bodies.
So, in your opinion, Glenn, what are the environmental conditions that create fascism?
Boy. Help me understand fascism. Fascism is a condition. Fascism is a human being who thinks in what way? Like what is a fascist?
Ultra nationalist that our tribe is the number one tribe.
Okay.
We're the mightiest, and therefore, since we're the mightiest, we get to make the laws.
So that sounds like pride.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going. What else with fascism?
We need a powerful, leader in order to enforce all of our laws, and we're going to have a strong enforcement of our way over anybody else's way. Yeah.
It sounds like there's some fear in there, like the fear of pollution. Like our way is the right way, and so we've got to get rid of anything that isn't the right way, isn't our way, because it could pollute us. And there's something there. Yeah.
So you say pride and fear, are those environmental conditions though?
No. I'm trying to isolate.
I what characterizes fascism?
Yeah.
And I think that's the question I want to drive at too. Like, what drives a person to fascist beliefs, to thinking that and you're looking, you're the first stuff that comes immediately to you is like these internal like feelings. Like,
well, the first thing that comes to me when you ask that question is I would need to hear from some fascists. Honestly, like I would need to listen to some fascists and kind of get to know them before I could even attempt to try to understand what shaped them, because like right now it's from a place of ignorance. I don't really know what fascism is. I don't know if I know any fascists. I'm just not familiar enough to really be able to speculate then on what formed it. But I think it comes down to the nature versus nurture kinds of questions that I've heard about and read about in other places. And you're kind of asking, how does a person's personality arise in the first place? Mm-hmm. And I've been interested in the Enneagram and Myers-Briggs and, these personality typing systems that, there's benefits to them. There's things about them that are just like silly. And, but it's recognizing patterns of thought and patterns of belief across people. So you're wondering, like, what would cause someone to become a fascist? Do you remember the movie Swing Kids?
No.
Did you ever see that?
Never saw it. Christian
Bale, the guy from Dead Poet Society who committed suicide, that was also in House, whenever that guy was. Mm-hmm. And it's set in Nazi Germany, or the rise of Nazi Germany. And there are these kids that really love swing music, and they get caught by the Nazi youth, and they get caught by the Nazis and sent to like a Nazi youth center. And one of them, Christian Bale, totally gets indoctrinated, totally becomes a fascist. And then his friend, this other guy, doesn't. And then they end up, it's this really sad, tragic story. And it's funny because when I saw that movie, I think I watched it after my mission, and there's a scene when they're in the Nazi youth camp and they're being indoctrinated against Jews and how they're the vermin of the earth, and you are the light that's supposed to rid the world of all of the issues. It reminded me of being in the MTC. Like, I was almost expecting them to start singing Call to Serve, because it's like this galvanizing message of, you've got the truth and everybody else is this sinful, fallen place. It was eerily similar. And so there again, I think you've got elements of fear. I think you've got elements of pride. I think there's a whole shit ton of ignorance in there, because it's just an inability or an unwillingness to look at things from another perspective and accept things from another perspective. So there's a rigidity to it. But like to do like a blanket statement of like why somebody would become a fascist. I think that those elements would have to be involved in it somehow, but that doesn't mean that everybody who has fears and pride is going to move towards fascism.
Yeah. That's really interesting that you went to this example of being in the MTC, because this is really what like scares me.
Mm.
Is like I'm really worried that like that Mormonism, you know, the patterns of thought that you develop in Mormonism uh, can lead to fascism, and that
Sure.
like really worries me. I do really think that this is kind of like a big question of our time, is to like what causes fascism, and it's something that I think is definitely like on the rise, right? Nationalism and uh, uh, these, you know, as we face disasters, where do we turn in our thinking? And it's something that's kind of on my mind a lot. And anyways, I don't have any answers to any of these questions, right? I
Yeah.
just wanted to kind of like pick your
Yeah.
brain about it a little bit and see, I don't know, maybe how you felt about it. I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting to stuff. I don't know.
I wouldn't rush to say I wouldn't think that you're overreacting to anything. I think your reaction is perfect. I mean, your reaction is what it is. It couldn't be anything else, right?
Yeah.
So so you have this fear and concern because you see, like, what was the group that you talked about before? The Deseret
Deseret nationalists.
Tell me about your fear of fascism. Like, when did you start feeling that, and what brought it into your awareness?
Well, yeah, the kind of world we grow up in, where you have these history lessons about how the Nazis were bad and the Nazis did all these horrible things. And, growing up in the church, I feel like I got this messaging from the church that Mormons at some point during the end times would be basically treated like the Jewish people during World War II.
Persecuted
and maybe even like murdered and round up, and like that story of like the Northern Army coming in to fight the people in Jerusalem and wipe them out, right? Genocide.
I remember the two prophets very well. Yeah, the
right.
two prophets in Armageddon that are killed and they lay dead in the street for like 2.5 days, and then they resurrect.
Yeah, and coming to terms with being transgender, like being a part of a class of people who are in the news, in the headlines, as people who there are voices out there that want to abolish people like me, and
you're not talking to one of them,
right? I know that. Yeah. But it's scary, it and this idea that there's one true way and there's one right way and there's one God chosen people who are going to take over the earth, or it is their right to inherit the earth, and this earth belongs to them because God gave it to them. That's kind of, I don't know, spooky.
Yeah. And so you distanced yourself from that, though, right? Like, do you feel any of those kind of fascist tendencies in yourself?
No.
Any times where like you're intolerant or kind of like an us versus them mentality?
I mean, I guess towards fascists, right? And there's actually a lot of like writing on the tolerance of intolerance and whether or not that should be it's a whole nother like discussion.
But isn't that connected then to fascism? Like, because one of the characteristics we didn't call it out, but you mentioned it, is this intolerance of difference,
yeah,
intolerance of what's the word? Yeah, I'll just stick with difference, variety. I'm kicking myself that I don't know. It's the word that everybody talks about, diversity.
yeah,
Yeah, intolerance towards diversity. But I like the way that I look at the direction that the world is going. Like you said that you felt that fascism is on the rise. I feel like it's on the decline. And maybe there's like in the media, we're hearing more and more about it because people are becoming less and less tolerant of it and saying, no, we're not gonna put up with this. I don't see it continuing in the future. But I mean, you heard what I said on that thing this morning.
I don't know.
I think we
Yeah.
got about 60 years left on this planet, and things are going to start getting way worse. And
Well, that's
and at some point, I think just as a survival, people are going to have to drop intolerance and be more accepting of each other. And like, if there's fascist groups out there, I think, I don't know, I think they'll isolate themselves out of existence. Maybe I just kind of like how I do think that the Mormon church in time, given enough time, would become more accepting. I think the general members of the church have become more accepting of LGBTQ issues and diversity in general, and kind of embarrassed. I think that's on the rise. I think that's why so many people have been leaving. I think that's on the rise as well. But there's people that are staying in and want to see the Mormon church change. I think that there's younger generations of people that are going to see the very practical need to be accepting. And I think we're going through this period right now where our awareness of people's suffering in the world is greater than it has ever been before. And we're going through growing pains as a species as a result of that. But I think we're going to get our grounding. I think we're going to find our balance and build something beautiful, Wren.
Well, that's very hopeful and beautiful.
It's what nature does.
Is it?
It's what nature does. Yeah. It's what the embryos do, right?
Yes. But there are pretty nature doesn't always, it's not perfect, right?
Well, it's because the environment is constantly in flux, and there are some things that are hostile to other things and that erase and destroy those things, but then they come back, like it's the matter is disintegrated and it is repurposed into other things, right? Like if you look at existence from the perspective of atoms, it just changes form. Right. But of course, we're not atoms, we're humans. So why do we care about atoms? We only care about humans. But if you zoom out to look at all this interconnected stuff, like what are we? What are we? It's not just this material stuff.
Yeah. Well, let me tie this all back together,
All
back to Attack on Titan, which I mentioned.
All right.
So at Attack on Titan, right, the reason I brought it up is because it is about fascism, right? The quest for this coordinate is a quest that's out of desperation, and the main character who gets the coordinate, at that moment he then has the power to decide what they're going to do. Are they going to continue as a fascist nation, or is he going to allow his he sees that the only path forward is a path of fascism, that the only way that his people are going to survive is if they basically genocide the rest of the world, right? And so he has to make
like
this
the
decision.
Lamanites.
Yeah. And so he decides that's what he's going to do. And that's the there's a lot of the anime fan base is up in controversy over whether or not this was a moral good show because of the decision he makes, whether or not like it was actually like an anti-fascist story all along because it shows how like bad of a decision that was. That kind of thing. It's a lot of it's a very hip commentary on a very fun pop culture thing, trying to attract some young people to your show.
I don't know.
No.
It's funny because when you mentioned was it Attack on Titan, whatever, like, of course, because I'm a Marvel fan, I think about like Avengers Endgame or Infinity War or something. I think about Thanos being from Titan, and that was like Thanos's whole villain thing. I'm going to snap my fingers and do genocide for 50% of the universe. So that's what happens when this guy in
basically,
so he becomes Thanos.
Basically.
Yeah, funny.
Yeah, and I think it's like I mentioned also that it's kind of becoming more popular than this other anime, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I don't know if you've ever watched that, but that's also
the one that my daughter likes.
Good. That's my favorite as well.
Yeah.
I think the politics in that one is much better than Attack on Titan because it's also about fascism, but kind of how to resist fascism, which I really like.
How do you? Let's end on that, Wren. How do you resist fascism?
You resist fascism. Okay, so Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood is ultimate resistance to fascism is the surrender of power, right? Like the Full Metal Alchemist in the end decides to give up his alchemy and give up his power in order to save his brother, and that is the true resistance to fascism, is to give up power and give it to the people around you, right?
So it's the anti-Nephi Lehi solution where they just take a knee instead of taking up their arms, and they allow themselves to be slaughtered.
Yeah.
You can bring it all back to the book of Mormon.
Yeah. You can.
Yeah.
It's got universal truths.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, the resistance of fascism means being like vigilant about fascism and being aware in your day-to-day life, recognizing when people are mistreating others just simply because of like that they're different or that they're not part of the same tribe, kind of thing.
And first recognizing that in ourselves, like, am I being intolerant? Am I being fascist in any way?
Yeah. Well, this was a lot of fun, Glenn. I don't know if you thought this is where it was going to go, but
I had no idea. I was looking forward to it. No, I love it. Anytime, Wren.
Cool. Maybe I'll throw together my own little submission to listener essay thing.
I like it. Cool.
All right.
Talk to you later. See ya.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Put down the weapons that you use against yourself. You don't need them anymore. Lay down the weapons that you use against the world. We don't need another war. Put down the weapons that you use against yourself.
Hi, this is Hillary.
Matthew, Ryan,
Carol,
Keith,
Ashley, and I like to play bingo online while listening to Infants on Thrones.
You can comment on this episode on the website, infantsonthrones.com.
And if you really like what you hear, give the Quorum a 5-star rating and write a short review on iTunes.
I did.
Anyone for the closing prayer?
My worst crime is an inside job. Dark thoughts taking over like an inside mob. I tune into the scene between the eyes and take a breath.
Thank you for listening to Infants on Thrones.
I sit still and watch the thoughts float past me. Never mind the future, never mind what the past be. I like to jump and let the universe catch me. Free free fall, watch the beauty blow past me. I keep my pockets light, destination in sight. Keep my actions elevated to compassionate heights. I'm walking past the fight, laying down on Sunday night, choosing love when I pick up this mic. So